what's up, Scott Balker, of Imagination Creation Films, and today we're taking a look at this, the Sony FX30, and how it might just be the most affordably capable Super 35 cinema camera on the market. So before we jump into the review, a bit of housekeeping. This Sony was purchased by me, so I guess there's not really any housekeeping. I just wanted to state it up front. But you will, of course, get an honest review, like always, so subscribe and become a channel member because I'm wearing pants today. See? Sharing is caring. So this is the Sony FX30. It's a Super 35 technically APS-C sized backside illuminated 26 megapixel sensor in a package geared towards filmmakers rather than photographers. It can shoot 10-bit color in a wide variety of codecs and bit rates. It can shoot 4K up to 120 frames per second in 10-bit color as well, and can shoot 240 frames a second in 1080 in 10-bit as well. It has a reported 14 stops of dynamic range and has a dual base ISO of 800 and 2500. And that's enough about the specs. Let's dig into the camera. There's a lot of other videos out there on the specs. So I own the A7S III and the A7 IV, which are both great cameras, but what I was hoping was that I could replace the A7 IV with the FX30 and, well, have a power duo that would be capable in both video and stills. Now, is it capable? Let's find out. Let's talk about the image. Sony's color science has really progressed over the years, and I really like where it's landed in, say, the last 3-ish years based on the Venice cinema camera. Now, I judge camera's color science based on 3 things that, I love most in an image, and your love may vary, but don't forget to love. But for me, it's skin tones, complex nature scenes, and, partly cloudy skies. And Sony uses picture profiles to help you get the image that you want. Now, when Sony added S-Cinetone to the mix, it just made everything better. Sure, you can get more dynamic range from S-Log3. But for most things, S-Cinetone does extremely well. And for those that don't know, S-Cinetone is a color profile in the camera that gives it a mostly finished look, so it's maybe a slight color grading needed. So S-Log2 is gone. There is only S-Log3, and Sony has a new way of shooting log on the FX series that, it takes a little bit to get used to. You don't just adjust the ISO, you adjust the exposure index using Cine EI. And I could make an entire video on Cine EI, but for now, I didn't. Just know it's a slightly better way to shoot S-Log3, but it's not perfect either. Now, continuing with color, with the FX lineup, you can import LUTs on the camera and bake them into your footage, or just send them out via HDMI to your client monitor if you want. That's a nice feature for sure. And something you won't find on, a photo-style camera. The stabilization in the camera is really solid. In fact, it's identical to the A7S III and the A7 IV. It has the same limitations at higher frame rates as those cameras as well. Meaning, at the max frame rates, you only get simple stabilization and not the full 5-axis. With the 5-axis and 60 frames per second and some practice walking, you could quickly get a perfectly smooth walking shot with it. And it records metadata, so you can use their Catalyst Browse software to stabilize it in post. Just remember to disable the in-camera stabilization first. Autofocus is the same incredibly good autofocus that Sony has had for a couple years now, and it just keeps getting better with human, animal, and bird eye detection. Videos and photos will be accurately focused in, almost all lighting conditions. It can also pick up Mr. Bill's eyes if you put him on this shelf right here, so yeah, don't do that. It has an ability to find and track eyes when it's really dark too. It's kind of amazing. Image. Now, all of these features mean diddly squat if the image sucks, and this image does not suck, that is. Diddly squat, I wonder where that came from. Then again, I kind of don't want to know now. It sounds like it could be worse than what I think. Anyway, you know what isn't worse than what I think? the image. It's very nice. Now, there is more noise than, say, the A7S III or even the A7 IV, which is to be expected as the photo sites on the FX30 are smaller. But honestly, it's not horrible and can easily be cleaned up with a little noise reduction in post. And noise reduction in post, it's a non-big deal. I really wish people would stop being so averse to it. Yes, I love a clean image, but on the flip side, adding a little noise reduction to clean up noisy image on post, it's fine as long as it's not catastrophic noise, which in the case of the FX30, it's not. It's not even bad noise, it's just noise. It's there when you push it, but it's manageable. Rolling shutter, it's there. It's not the worst in the industry, but it's not going to win any awards either. Now, they advertise it as a 14 stops of dynamic range, and I can see that. It looks and feels very close to the A7S III, which has a very nice dynamic range of about 15 stops. But it's a couple of stops away from, say, my Red Dragon, and several stops away from V-Raptor. But 14 stops is not shabby, so don't take this as a negative. It's actually a positive. Now, a lot of detail comes from the oversampling of the 6K sensor when shooting 4K up to 60 frames a second. Now, the sensor can't read out the full sensor fast enough to give you 120 frames per second oversampled, so it must crop in an additional 1.6 crop on top of the APSC crop of 1.546, if I did my math correctly. So, except for 120 frames per second, you would get 6K worth of data to put into the 4K or 2K codec of your choice. And speaking of codecs, you get several choices of codecs and bit rates. XAVC-HS is 4K with an H.265 codec and bit rates from 30 to 280 megabits, all at 10-bit color depth and between 422 and 420 chroma subsampling ratios. XAVC-S 4K is an H.264 codec with bit rates from 60 to 280 megabits per second with both 8-bit 420 and 10-bit 422 color depth and chroma subsampling, respectively. There's also XAVC-SI 4K, which is an H.264 all iframe 422 codec that has bit rates from 240 to 600 megabits. And this is the highest quality and easiest to edit with codec on the camera, but it's not always necessary to shoot with a codec like that. As for which one should you use, I'd say it depends. I probably always use 10-bit color, it just looks better, but I find that most people can't tell the difference in the other codecs as they're higher settings, except for like maybe in certain situations. On YouTube, it's really hard to tell because, well, YouTube just destroys the heck out of it again. For clients, it's a little easier. I typically shoot in regular XAVC-S 4K, 100 megabits, 422 10-bit for these videos that are going on, say, social. And XAVC-SI for clients if it's not going on social. But you should test for yourself and see what you prefer. XAVC-HS 4K will look better than XAVC-S 4K, but it's a much more CPU-dependent codec, so it can slow your editing workflow down a little bit. Even on the MacBook Pro M1 Max, when you hit the spacebar to play, it takes about a half second, then it just plays normally, and it does that for any number of those on the H.265. As for recording limit, there isn't one. And with the internal fan, well, you can record all day until your media fills up or your battery dies. And it's honestly not a problem. The fan is slightly noisy when it gets a little hot. You can hear it, but it's similar to other cameras with fans. So if it shows up in your audio, just remove it. We have the technology now. Another great feature that, well, irks me that Sony won't enable for the A7S III, but it is in the FX30, is the ability to add timecode via USB and embed it as data and not just as audio. I get that they're trying to differentiate between the cine and the photo lines, but come on, it's a software change. Enable it. Now, there's a couple of neat features on here that, well, play with the sensor a little bit. The first is called breathing compensation, and it works by digitally zooming in and out of the 6K sensor to compensate for focus breathing on certain Sony lenses. And it works quite well on the FX30 and sadly is missing on the A7S III, which Philip Bloom has discussed in detail and even publicly requested in a YouTube video, and well, rightly so, to Sony, about these little firmware pieces. And well, that could be absolutely added to some of the older bodies, but why they don't, it's a bit of a mystery. You can find his video linked below as he's subbed it all up pretty nicely. Another little feature which may or may not be useful to you is the zoom rocker on the front shutter button here. You can use this with any of the Sony power zoom lenses to get a quick and easy zoom ability. I don't have a power zoom. You can also map it to the sensor using clear image zoom, except in S&Q 120 frames per second. So you can actually zoom in, or rather crop in, on the 6K sensor down to 4K, which is essentially a 1.5 times digital zoom, but you aren't compromising the 4K image. Well, technically at this point you aren't subsampling that 6K image, so it is affecting the image quality slightly, but it's still a true 4K image. But you know, that's just semantics. But you know me, I'm here, we're always up for semantics. Photos, well, it has the ability to take photos, and well, it can do so well, but it isn't focused on being a photo camera, and it shows. Sadly, it can't replace my A7 IV, which I was kind of hoping for a couple of small reasons to some, and they're kind of huge to me. Number one, this has no physical shutter, and I really prefer the control of a physical shutter. In addition, it does help with rolling shutter in photos, not videos. Number two, no bulb mode. One thing I do quite a bit is astrophotography and long exposure motion control or long exposure time lapse, and I simply can't expose longer than 30 seconds with the FX30, which is something I need for long exposure photography. So what are the pros and cons? Well, pros, it's a 4K 120 frames per second 10-bit Super 35 sensor, APS-C technically, with excellent stabilization. Excellent codec support with a variety of bit rates and codecs built with the video professionals in mind. Cons, no physical shutter, no bulb mode, 1.6 crop for 4K at 120 frames per second. That's in addition to the 1.5 crop that already exists in the APS-C. So you gotta add that up. And it can get a little noisy. It's certainly not a younger sibling of the FX3. It's more like a second cousin as far as low light, but it's not bad. Now, my final thoughts. Well, here they are, and I can go either way. It doesn't solve all of my problems. It doesn't exactly replace the camera. It doesn't measure up to my higher end cameras, well, as expected, and it doesn't do anything remarkable except one thing. It makes a pretty great image for an incredibly inexpensive price. Now, I bought it in the hopes that it would replace the A7 IV, but in the end, I don't think it can, and so I was planning on returning it and, well, not even putting out a review. But it was interesting. It wasn't until I detached emotion from my evaluation of this camera and did this review that I realized that what it was and what it wasn't. And I waffled on this quite a bit. I didn't even want to put out this review because honestly, I really like it when people buy something and review it and then return it. And that's not cool. And it put me at a crossroads. But I've talked about this camera several times on the live stream and my uncertainty with it based on what it does and doesn't. So I figure there's not really any harm in releasing the review because, well, maybe it will help someone else who is thinking similar to me. What do you think of the FX30? Do you think I made the right decision? Let me know in the comment section down below what you think about it. Would you have kept it? Are you considering buying it? If you are, there's an affiliate link down below if you'd like to purchase it that way or anything else. It really does help the channel grow. And remember to subscribe and become a channel member as well because it allows you to be part of the Cool Kids Club. And as always, as I like to leave it, don't let your passions center around your life. Let your life center around your passions.